Hi. This is going to start out a little different than you might be used to, but there's a point in the chaos and a reason I'm going to start how I do. This is my review and a small retrospective on The Irishman, Martin Scorsese's new film, but I'm going to start with astrology. So, astrology. Some people believe it and some people don't, but why is it important here? Scorsese is a Pisces moon, a Scorpio sun, and a Leo rising. Pacino, likewise, is a Leo rising. Now, me myself, I'm the same as Scorsese, except my Pisces and Scorpio are reversed. So I'm a Pisces sun, Scorpio moon, and a Leo rising. So I feel I can understand a dynamic here at play between a couple of these actors and this director that is quite interesting. So to briefly explain, I'm going to use a metaphor. Let's say you were at a party, and if you saw someone from far away, what you would be seeing is their rising sign. This is your first impression of that person, their body and body language, mannerisms, their mask, what they present to the world around them, and how they express themselves. So when someone, like Scorsese or Pacino, has a Leo rising sign, well, this is the regal lion making its rounds. It roars, it's childish, ego at its finest. So there's this entertainer aspect of it. There's dramatic expression, loud and rambunctious personality, often confident and humorous as well as fierce. And this is one of the chief complaints when it comes to Pacino, and also one of the reasons people like him as an actor. So, people sometimes criticize and say all he does is yell a lot, or he's just very loud. It's a little bit deeper than that. So let's take it one step at a time. When you watch a Scorsese film, on the surface level of his films, the surface level aesthetic and first impression, isn't this what you see? A Leo rising type of impression. You have higher drama, outlandish and overtly fierce anger and violence expressed cathartically. That's the lion. That's Scorsese. Aesthetically, his films are very grand, they're very dramatic, they're very fierce, they're very intense, and usually they're an expression of ego or an expression of anger. Now, Pacino, at his best, and the reason I love his performances for the most part, is he is the loudest of his castmates, isn't he? I mean, he chews up the scenery like a confident, energetic, rambunctious, and humorous kid. Scarface, Carlito, Sonny, Lieutenant Colonel Frank, Frank Keller in Sea of Love. Most of his best performances and most of his best roles are what you would call loud, rambunctious, caricature archetype type of roles. He's not really going to have that quiet performance. Now, there is an exception to that, which I'm going to talk about later on when it comes to The Godfather, because a Leo rising sign type of performance can be very loud, rambunctious, esoteric, eccentric, as Pacino usually is, or there's the flip side of a Leo rising performance or personality, which would be brooding, intense, dramatic, and more of a quiet intensity, which is what you get with Pacino when it comes to the Godfather films. So he's done both, and he's somewhere in between when it comes to Dog Day Afternoon in terms of a high overt performance and a low, sizzling, subtle, brimming under the surface performance. So he's done low, he's done high, he's done both. Now, in all his performances where a director is using him well, what you see is, of course, the lion, the king archetype. Now, Scorsese as a Leo rising as well knows what he has with Pacino in this film, The Irishman. And in his first time working with Pacino, to no surprise, he utilizes him to the best of Pacino's abilities because the lion, the Leo, is the shiny object, the apex predator, and a pure person, usually to be hated, to be feared, admired, envied, or disliked, or, any range of those emotions. Why? Because the lion energy, especially when it is in the rising aspect of a person's makeup, equates to the center of attention, i.e. garnering the spotlight, being in the middle of the spotlight, i.e. an entertainer, a performer, in the traditional sense of the word, that is, playing to the back of the room, as you do in theater performance. And this is where whether the Leo rising is loud, as Pacino usually is, or even silent and quiet, as he sometimes is in The Irishman itself, because the Irishman film has both aspects of Pacino's performance. And this is one of the reasons I think Scorsese does such a great job, is you see the high, loud moments of the performance, and you see the quiet aspects of the performance, more so like Pacino was utilized in the Godfather films. A Leo rising native still garners attention, whether he's overt or whether it's brooding and dramatic and quiet. There's still something there that begs for the spotlight to be on them. So Pacino's Hoffa is the up loud aspect of Pacino's Leo rising energy, generally speaking, as most of his characters are. But he's also the low energy that you see in The Godfather. And it's a real shame to me that Scorsese didn't get to work with Pacino for more films, and this is the first time they're working together during the span of their careers, or even when Pacino was younger, because in my opinion, a Pacino-Scorsese career partnership would have been 10 times better than, say, a Leo DiCaprio Scorsese or Robert De Niro Scorsese partnership that they have been. This is based on many factors that are perceivable to me. My personal subjectivity in terms of what I want to see when it comes to a film, a director and an actor and an ensemble performance. And as controversial a statement as that might be, I stand by it 100% that I think a career partnership between Scorsese and Pacino would have been better than anything that Scorsese has done with De Niro or DiCaprio. For me, the aesthetic and expression of emotions of Scorsese's films, with the aesthetic and expression of emotions of Pacino as an actor and performer, go hand in hand. And to me, it's a marriage that would dwarf what Leo and Scorsese and De Niro and Scorsese did. I think it would shine 10 times brighter. But unfortunately, we only get to see a glimpse of it here in The Irishman. But you know what? Better late than never, and better something versus nothing. I am grateful to Mr. Pacino and Mr. Scorsese, as well as Mr. De Niro, because he's the one that really pushed for this film. Pacino was my favorite performance in The Irishman, with Pesci coming in at number 2, second to him, because Pacino hits all the notes. I mean, one should hit in this. And I will remind people, because I think people tend to forget, and they portray Pacino in his later age as a caricature and, almost a joke unto himself. Pacino is a Triple Crown acting winner. He's won an Academy Award, 2 Tony Awards, and 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, which not many actors quite literally have done. So in The Irishman, he showcases his full range. You've got the fierce orator and leadership skills of a Leo rising as he rallies the Teamsters Union, the intensity in his eyes and contorted, outlandish caricature-like expression as he's riling up the troops. You've got the humor, the proudness when he talks about his union and it being his, i.e. in his mind, if his union is going down, then he is going down with it. If his union succeeds, then he succeeds with it. It is, as he says, simple. And that's a very Leo rising thing, as well as an admirable thing in his character that kind of leads to the character of Hoffa being a more tragic character that raises your empathy more than any other character in the film. Essentially, he will not live without it or live with it. Without Pacino, without Hoffa, the Union is a demented form of itself, of its once great self, a twisted version. That's the tragedy of his character. And Pacino is perfectly cast as Hoffa. He is loyal to his Union. He is loyal to his friend De Niro, Frank. And the Union becomes a demented and twisted form of itself, the Union, I should say, in his absence, similar to how his friend betrays him. In fact, by supporting his friend De Niro and showing up to the awards dinner that's in Frank De Niro's character's honor, Pacino/Hoffa finally, irreversibly so, implicates himself in his demise, and he essentially seals his fate. I mean, to me, that's the one scene that's the big turning point that makes it a tragedy at its finest. He helps to set up Hoffa. Oh, well, I should say that scene helps to set up Hoffa as a sad character, as De Niro's Irishman, Frank, as the opposite, because he chooses essentially himself over his friendship and even more so over his family. Despite the justifications of his character and the logic reasoning behind it and how his character might view the world and his situation, this is why he ends up alone. I mean, he ends up alone because he chooses the gangster way of life and himself over his friend Jimmy Hoffa and his family, primarily I think his daughter, who was named Peggy. And he did have a choice there in front of him. We clearly see that the choice is made through the lens of his daughter's eyes when her father kills her father figure, and she knows it. In general, Leo Risings, as Pacino's character and Pacino as an actor are very good with children because they are just big old pure children themselves. I mean, this is something that is evident with his angry outbursts, his ice cream sundaes that Hoffa likes to eat, his simplistic but admirable worldview that he has. And it's not just Pacino's Hoffa character that has this. I mean, this is something that's been with Pacino, whether you're looking at Scarface or you're looking at Scent of a Woman. It's a quality common to his characters because it's something that he does very well. This almost adult child look characters in their passion and overt, bombastic nature of the performance and the loudness and the temper tantrums and the shouting and the anger, the regal rebelliousness, as you would call it, that childish defiance that defines a Leo. Or if you want to use a metaphor, a Leo is like saying the ego. Same thing. So Hoffa chews on there's a scene at the awards ceremony where Hoffa chews on his steak, almost with this childlike dance expression on his face, in support of his friend Frank, at De Niro's award dinner, which Leo Risings are loyal, extremely so, towards their friends. So he's chewing the steak and he's having dinner, and he stares down this other gangster, I believe his name is Tony, who's talking with Joe Pesci's character. And unbeknownst to Hoffa, who is acting like a passionate and proud, stubborn little kid, he is being presented in a false light. And that's what Tony is doing when he's talking to Pesci. And he's being set up for a fall in that moment. And De Niro mentions this before the dinner that, when Hoffa asks him who's going to be there, and, De Niro says, I would like you to, essentially in not so many words, but says he would like him to be there, but he would understand if he didn't go. And, Hoffa says, of course he would, what kind of friendship would it be otherwise? But him being at the dinner directly allows for him to be set up for his demise, whereas if he didn't attend the dinner, then the gangsters being in Pesci's ear, filling him up with words as they point out Hoffa's misinterpreted and smug expression and impression as reason to, sort of say off him, among other things, and mixing words as to what his intentions are, might not have happened, or might not have happened as to that degree. But it did happen, and this leads to a final talk with Pesci and Pacino right after that scene, almost like a father and child interaction. And it's interesting how Scorcese, presents this. After all, Pacino, the actor, is the Leo Rising, and Hoffa, the character, is an adult child. So, in the best of ways that someone can be an adult child, idealistic, proud, persistent, passionate, but also with the tantrums and the stubbornness. So Pacino talks with Pesci, like a father and a son, and the scene directly after that is Pesci praising De Niro as his son. So this also helps highlight the point that where Peggy chooses Pacino over De Niro, or Hoffa over Frank as a father figure versus her real father, and Pesci chooses De Niro over Pacino, that is to say Frank over Hoffa, as a son, that's really the tragedy in both ways. whether it comes to the father figure or whether it comes to the father and the son figure. Um, there didn't need to be a choice like that of a father figure over a father and a rebellious and stubborn son over an obedient and bending son. But the paradigm of the gangster life made it so. And not only was Pacino the victim, but his friend Dinero as well was also a victim. Frank and Hoffa are both victims to the gangster life. More so Hoffa because he was not as directly involved in it. But their lives, friendship, and family lives, they're the ultimate casualty of the gangster way, and nothing is really spared. Even if one, and this comes to a sensibility when it comes to acting performances, even if one tends to appreciate performances like, say, the performances of Harvey Keitel, Pesci, or De Niro in this movie more than Pacino, just remember that the film comes alive when Pacino enters the picture. The other low-key performances and characters become stronger. They become strong as foils because of Hoffa's interplay with them. And not only do the characters all focus their intentions, motivations, and emotions on Pacino's Hoffa, but the plot itself as well literally likewise hugs its arms around him, and he effectively becomes my favorite type of character in a movie when it comes to cinema, and that's the linchpin or the catalyst character. And Mr. Pacino does this so well over and over in multiple parts throughout his career. He really does a good job of being that guy in the spotlight and the catalyst character that draws your attention towards him and eats up the screen. And, in a film that's 3.5 hours long, where you have such subtle acting with all the other characters except for Pacino, it's that much more important that he's firing on all cylinders because that's where you get the balance. So I also thought Bobby Kennedy was well cast as well, which was a great little play with Pacino, and really anybody that Pacino played with in this movie, he made them look that much better. That's what happens when you're a catalyst character. I know a lot of people say that Robert De Niro does a great job, as he did in the Joker film, of giving Joaquin Phoenix so much as an actor because he's subdued. Well, there's two ways to do that. You could do the subdued Robert De Niro approach where you let another actor and you give them that because of how much you react to them. And you can also do it the Al Pacino way where you overtly approach a scene, chew up the scenery, eat it up, and you give the other actor so much because of how much you let them play to you or react to you. So you could do it both ways. And I am, by the way, thoroughly thankful. I got to see such a great performance and such a full performance from Pacino so late in his career, and that Scorcese got to use him to paint with a full brush for this film. Really, I just don't know how they went so long without working together. From there's just so much that Scorsese does with the character in that's unique to Pacino as an actor. You've got the bombastic, as I mentioned, orator fierceness as the head of the Teamsters Union during rallies and speeches. You've got the childish play and relation with children, namely De Niro's daughter with the ice creams and the dancing with her, and his own son as well with proudness. There's that great scene in the courthouse about teaching him, with a gun you charge and with a knife you run. Gun charge, knife run. As well as talking to him about putting fish in the car with the lingering smell. His quieter moments, his loyalty to friends, as is highlighted during the phenomenal scene, and my favorite scene of the whole film, where he berates his subordinates as he fills with realization that he will be going to jail, and the thought of having to leave his precious union, to the scene right after that of consoling De Niro, because Pacino is horrified that his friend was offended. I didn't see you there, he says, blinded by his passionate oration and speech that De Niro was even in the room. So he, as he's saying that they're friends, and he'd never say that to hurt him, and due to his stubbornness, and all this type of stuff. So it's a really great moment, a really great scene and characterization, because it shows this passionate orator and Hoffa that could get lost in the moment and the bigness of the moment, and the sensitivity in De Niro that he took it personally. And Hoffa didn't even see him in the room. And, in that moment, you see how much Hoffa values the friendship, which later on we find out, unfortunately, and maybe you could argue this, but maybe De Niro doesn't value it as much, or maybe he thought that by him killing Hoffa, it was more respectable than the other goons killing him. Who knows? I mean, he still killed him, though. So you've got the moment in the car. As vulnerability fills Pacino's Hoffa, not only, and in that moment, the interplay is great because he not only shows friendship and kindness to Frank when he sees him in the car and says, hey, I was waiting for you at 2, And again, this harkens back to another moment. We know how important it is for the Hoffa character to not be stood up. We know how much he hates it when someone's late, more than 10 minutes. But with Frank, even though it's the same thing, he shows warmth of seeing a good friend and does not have the same reaction he had with, quote unquote, the little guy. As he says, we see it all in his face when he sees his son in the car driving and that killer, gamboon or mafia thug next to him, and he goes, who the fuck are you? Like, and so on. So another great scene, by the way, is and I mentioned the little guy earlier on, is the scene in the prison with the little guy. I forget his name, Pronto or something like that. Tony, maybe, I don't, Pro something. So he has a scene with Pacino about how there's a difference between, and it's a great scene that Scorcese really has a nice touch when it comes to these scenes. These character scenes with two characters. He did similar things in The Wolf of Wall Street, especially with DiCaprio and Jonah Hill. But he does it again in this scene where they're talking about the difference between theft and extortion. And they're going back at it, and these two characters already don't like each other. And the little guy starts telling Pacino to lower his voice, and Pacino starts to react, lower my voice, and the scene as well, where the little guy is more than 10 minutes late, also helps set up Pacino's Hoffa, in that he's making exceptions for De Niro, whereas De Niro did not make an exception for Hoffa. He doesn't like people being late, doesn't like the little guy being late. He's okay with De Niro being late, Frank, because it's his friend. So he greets him with warmth, not with conflict or aggression. And again, it shows the difference in friendship between Frank and Hoffa and Jimmy, in that Hoffa made the exception for his friend, and De Niro didn't, and pull a bullet in the back of his friend's head. So you can interpret that he wanted to put the bullet in his friend's, Jimmy Hoffa's head, and make it a quick death, as well as spare his son the sight of seeing his father get killed, or maybe his son get killed. But still, at the end of the day, he did kill his friend instead of save him, which seems like that might have been what Pesci's angle was all along. It looks like originally they were going to let it go, and they were going to keep, Pesci was going to keep De Niro with him, so the other guys take out Hoffa, and at the last minute, it looked like he gave him the benefit of flying him to location to let, in a way, he held his glasses, and then he had him kill Hoffa, and then when he got back, he gave him his glasses again. So it's a very subtle little moment, but it does speak to Pesci's angle all along, like, look, he's your friend, so there's a chance for you to go kill him instead of you sitting here with me and others kill him on the way. Fantastic moments for Pacino all around. Love him or hate him, he was necessary, and a much-needed dose of adrenaline in the film. Shooting star, bombastic performance and all. So this is what you call a home run swing, and Scorsese needed a few of those from Pacino for this film to function properly. I can't mention that enough, and Pacino delivers. Moving on. Pisces moon. So Scorsese is a Pisces moon. Now, what does that mean, and what can that paint more clearly for us in this bigger picture analysis to help in our understanding of what is occurring here at a deeper level? Not just as characters, but as actors and a director. Well, it's been brought up and to attention that De Niro and Scorsese have a shorthand way of working together. Thank you, Half Hope, for that as well. But this shorthand where they can read each other's minds and know what the other wants to say, why? Why is that there? Or how does that work? Well, what many people don't realize, and I myself didn't even know until now, and this came after I did some digging further down the rabbit hole, is not only is Scorcese a Pisces moon, but Robert De Niro is also a Pisces moon. So that's actually quite interesting. Now, not only that, but Robert De Niro is a Leo sun, Pisces moon, and Cancer rising. Okay, so this tells us a hell of a lot, and I'm going to bring in another director into this for comparison's sake, and that is Coppola. But first, let me explain a bit of what's happening here, besides for the obvious fact that Scorsese and De Niro both being Pisces moons. It explains pretty much why they even have this actor-director shorthand, and aside from working on multiple projects together, the reason and common link between them as to why they understand each other so well, besides growing up in a similar, family environment and with similar culture, obviously. But back to the party metaphor. So we talked about the rising sign and how it is the physical mask or first impression someone at a party gets from you if they never talk to you or approach you to know you more instead of what they see just from afar. So the rising sign is a first impression. This is what someone thinks of you when they see you across the room. They never come to talk to you. They never get to know you. Let's say a person at the party approached you and then proceeded to talk with you for 20 or 30 minutes or so. They get to know you a little bit, your personality, and this is your sun sign. Your sun sign is your personality. It is what someone knows of you if they talk to you and got to see more of you than they would with a first impression from afar, but not as much of you as the friend who's known you for 15 years knows of you. So, see, your friend at the party who's known you for 15 years, he knows your moon sign. And this is what is deep underneath the surface that good friends know. How you think as a person, what you feel as a person, how your emotions inside function, despite what you're projecting to the outside world. So that good friend knows who you really are. He knows your moon sign, and not your sun sign, which is your personality, and not your rising sign, which is the first impression you put out to the world and strangers as a mask. So, Pisces moon. That's who De Niro and Scorsese really are on the inside. Their emotions, how they think, how they feel, how they react. The fact that they're both Pisces moons just means they're both similar on the inside and can better connect in this way. So they don't need to speak. They know what each other is thinking and feeling because they're thinking and feeling the same thing for the most part. And the Pisces moon, another little comment I want to make, and I'm going to end up bringing Coppola into this, is the Pisces moon, it's Pisces. So it's the twin fish, or in ancient times, what was known as the twin dolphins. A lot of people don't know that before Pisces was a sign of opposite swimming fish, it was a sign of opposite swimming dolphins. And the dolphins, as an animal and as a symbol, they're very imaginative and highly intelligent. And some argue that dolphins are closer to the intelligence of humans than almost any other animal. So Pisces moon, these people, in general, they're very intelligent, very imaginative, but they're also very good with music. Pisces moon sign is something you see with musicians over and over. And I think this is one of the reasons Scorsese, as a director, always edits to music so well. This is something he does in The Irishman as well, and it is to phenomenal effect. He does it, I think, more subtly than he has in past films like Goodfellas or Mean Streets, or any of his films, really. But I think he does it more subtly here, and it's very effective. All the musical choices and shot sequences that are edited to music are fantastic, and they're done just right and at just the right moments. And for comparison, most Pisces moons do well with musical careers. Charlie Parker, Leonard Cohen, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, Prince, Axl Rose, Kanye West, Usher. These are all Pisces moons. So Scorsese has a way with music. If anything, if he wasn't a director, he might have been good in the music industry in one way or another. Maybe as a producer, you never know. Pesci. Well, Pesci too. When you look at Joe Pesci and his background, although he is not a Pisces moon, I saw a documentary on Joe Pesci once that he would have loved to have been more of a known as a musician rather than an actor. In fact, his first choice was to be a musician. And he even had a short musical career where he released an album. He knew some big musicians as well in bands growing up that he ran in the same circles, and he played with them when he was younger. I don't know if this draws him to Scorsese and how Scorsese thinks and feels and directs, but I think there might be something there. I think this does draw Pesci as an actor and, musician to Scorsese as a musically inclined director. And it doesn't just have to be with editing to music. I mean, you could say someone's a musically inclined director because he knows rhythm and pace of a film, which Scorsese does. And at 3.5 hours, I didn't feel the film being long or too slow until the very end, after Pacino, ironically, after Pacino left the film. But you could say that was warranted, and the film needed that for a little bit of gravitas. So Pesci is my second favorite performance in this film, and to me, aside from Pacino's bombastic performance as Hoffa, Pesci's low-key, and I think his name was Russell, angle of a character, I more hold in line with Brando's Godfather. To me, really, there will always be two gangster godfathers in cinema, and I have to say that's Brando in Coppola's Godfather, and Pesci's Russell in The Irishman. I really do see it as that type of character. Now, earlier I mentioned Coppola, and I did this for a reason. Coppola, unlike Scorsese, got to work with both De Niro and Pacino at the top of their powers in The Godfather 2. So the argument could be made that Scorsese worked with Pacino and De Niro in The Irishman later in their careers and elevated them to the top of their powers of former glory when it comes to their acting. And I can agree with that. I mean, I actually feel that The Godfather 2 and The Irishman would make for a fantastic double feature and film comparison in general. I mean, it is striking to me that as a Pisces moon, Scorsese's utilization of Pacino and De Niro in his story, it's more fluid, emotional, imaginative, creative, and humanity focused on humanity, whereas the narrative Coppola weaves and how he utilized Pacino and De Niro as a Scorpio moon in his films is more intense, dramatic, power dynamic oriented, and overtly manipulative and dark in terms of characters and their natures, and in general, even the aesthetic. Now, power dynamics are present in Scorsese's Irishman for sure. It just feels less overt, and it feels more submissive, or I should say subversive, and it also feels more humane, whereas Coppola's films feel more detached and cold. It's just preference, and this makes complete sense. I mean, Kubrick, like Coppola, was a Scorpio moon, and as well, take a look at his films. I mean, it's some of the coldest and detached films you'll ever find, but as good as Coppola and Kubrick are, and it's a very Scorpio moon to be detached when it comes to emotions, and their films reflect this, as well as the power dynamics and ego and intensity and dramatic darkness of human nature. Scorsese making a film like this, like The Irishman, with such a humane core to it, at this stage of his career, and of not only his career, but also the careers of Pesci, Pacino, De Niro, Keitel, I mean, you name it, it makes you appreciate Marty more, and his dedication and longevity when it comes to cinema even more. I mean, Scorsese still has a lot to say. And folks, a film like this with an actors ensemble cast like this at their ages doesn't ever really happen. I mean, not in today's world. It's a rarity. So The Irishman really, to me, is something special. And I argue it does a lot to elevate the debate that career output-wise, Scorsese may have just overtaken Coppola. I mean, when it comes to the pecking order, for me, given the current landscape and comments, not only of Marvel films and the cinema landscape and Scorsese's part in that, but also evolving technologies, ever-changing audiences, political correctness climates. That makes The Irishman, to me, it's more of a rarity today than the Godfather films were when they came out, in the film landscape that they came out in. I mean, if that makes any sense. And that is why I value what Scorsese did here even more. I mean, he really is one of the last Mohicans, as they say. And, you know, you look at, like, for example, we're probably not going to get a film like that again. I mean, with the stages of these actors and where their careers are at, with the stages of Scorsese in his age and all their ages, really. I mean, most of them are in their 70s. This is a gift to cinema. And when I hear people comment on Martin Scorsese and he puts out a film like this, which there's no reason I should ever be interested in a film about Jimmy Hoffa. I barely even know who the guy is. There's no reason I should be interested in a film about unions or Teamsters. Barely have any idea what that is. I mean, I have a sense, but it's not a film that if you write it down on paper and tell me this is the film, it's 3.5 hours long, I would ever watch. I would never watch that film. And I enjoyed it at 3.5 hours long. Why is that? That's because it's art. So, you know, I enjoy it because it's Scorsese and what he has to say. It's Pacino and what he has to say. You know, as a director, as an actor. It's Dinero and what he has to say. It's the screenwriter and what he has to say. It's what the producers have to say. You know, we forget cinema is expression, but it's also risk and highly subjective. It's not a political agenda as much as it is a personal agenda. Now, have there been filmmakers that make political statements or political agendas? Of course. Oliver Stone. I love his films. I love his Nixon film with Anthony Hopkins. I love Born on the 4th of July with Tom Cruise. Yes, there are political films. Yes, there are films with agenda. But there is also a film that is just agenda and no art or story to it, and there's a film that has agenda, among other things. And to go back for a sec, I mentioned that Robert De Niro is a Leo sun, Pisces moon, Cancer rising. Why is it important that he's a Cancer rising? Well, Cancers, or Cancer energy, is very family oriented. They're very protective of their friends and their family, and they're very interested in that group dynamic. So it makes sense that for The Irishman, he was the one that brought Joe Pesci back in. He was the one that got Al Pacino. He was the one that brought Scorsese on board and took The Irishman to him and fought for it over the last 10 or couple years to get it done. So really, this is Robert De Niro's film. And I think it's interesting. All the people involved. Robert De Niro is also a Leo sun, so you know, when he plays off against Pacino, and you have a Leo rising in Pacino, and you have a Leo sun in De Niro, well, what does that mean? What that means is that when you see Pacino, you see his Leo energy and ego from afar, very loudly, in that first impression, as a caricature. And when you see De Niro, you see it in the scenes that run 10 minutes, 15 minutes, in those conversational, one-on-one, low moments. So why does this work? Well, this works because when Pacino's chewing up the scenes, you're getting that Leo energy, which Leo energy is entertaining. Leo energy is drama. Leo energy is ego. It is entertainment. So you're getting it in the up moments because of Pacino. And then you're getting it in the low moments because of De Niro. And you're getting it because of De Niro, and Pacino's supporting that. And in the high moments, you're getting it from Pacino, and De Niro is supporting that. So make no mistake, Scorsese, as a Leo rising, so he understands that energy, but also as a very smart director, knows that. He knows that when Pacino's chewing up the scenes, De Niro gives him more to chew. And when De Niro is in those quieter moments, Pacino gives him more to play off of. So they contradict each other, but they support each other at the same time, if that makes sense. When Pacino's in the lead, De Niro's in the supporting function in that scene. So they're both, at that sense, hitting their peaks. Pacino's chewing up scenery, De Niro is giving him reactions. The opposite, De Niro is playing a low-key scene and being quiet in that moment, which still allows Pacino to eat up the scenery, but not in a high energy overt way, in a low energy subdued way, which might be difficult to do if he wasn't doing that scene with Robert De Niro. If he was doing that scene with somebody else that wanted to chew the scenery and he was trying to have a low moment, he might have to come in higher, and you might have a little combativeness there, and the scene wouldn't gel. But because these two function at the opposite ends of the spectrum, Scorsese uses them to balance each other to their strengths. So when that happens, especially over a 3.5 hour long film, you don't just have a pacing of a film that's imbalanced, where you have a whole film centered on Pacino and it's too high, hitting high notes over and over and over after every scene. Like if you had action after action after action after action, like a Michael Bay film, and it tires you out. So you would never be able to sit through a 3.5 hour movie like that. Maybe for an hour, but that's about it. Probably less, as we saw with films like The Man of Steel's third act and Batman vs Superman. Most people can't sit through that for more than 10-15 minutes if it's that high of a note. So it gives Scorsese the ability to pace the films. So you have bombastic, quiet, bombastic, quiet, action, dialogue scene, crowd scene, one-on-one scene. So it just speaks to the versatility of Pacino and De Niro, and it speaks to the ability of Scorsese and his directing ability to balance those two actors, and to balance his characters, and to balance the storyline, and to balance a 3.5 hour runtime. And that's because he understands rhythm, and that's because he understands pacing, and that's because he's a Pisces moon. So when you watch a Scorsese film, and you'll see this a lot in Casino, you'll see it in Wall Street, you'll see it in Mean Street, Wall Street, Mean Streets, Casino, The Irishman. When you watch a Scorsese film, and he is a Pisces moon director and a Scorpio sun, you get a film that is rhythmically paced. It's very loud and bombastic because it's very dramatic and exaggerated. Characters are blowing up all over the screen with their anger because of his Leo rising. But they're tough films. They're tough, gritty, dark films because of his Scorpio sun. So Scorsese's personality is reflected in his films. You see a film that, by its nature, is dark and gritty and hard-hitting and dark side of humanity and tough. Scorpio sun, very tough personality, and Scorsese talks about this, growing up in New York City, getting beaten up, the difference about how he uses lighting versus how Spielberg uses lighting. Spielberg grew up in Arizona, everything was sunny in the desert and adventure type of aesthetic, and Scorsese grew up in alleyways and corridors, and if a light was out, you could be getting beaten up at the end of the hallway. So very different sensibility from Gotham City, which is New York. And then the aesthetic, like I said, is his Leo rising, and then you have his emotions and his rhythmic timing. And that's not just music, that's the pacing of his films. All his films are very well paced. Actually, if you think about it, most Scorsese films are some of the best paced films I have ever seen. Gangs of New York is another one. Really, all of his filmography. And I am interested. I think this is a good start to analyze some directors in terms of their makeup, when it's astrologically speaking. Coppola would be a very interesting one. I know Spielberg is also a Scorpio moon, and I'm sure there's some other directors. I would be curious to see what they are. But yeah, just an interesting analysis here of The Irishman. The film on paper, I would never feel I would sit down 3.5 hours for, except for the fact that it's directed by Scorcese and involves Pacino, Dinero, and a handful of other actors. Also, one comedian. There's a great scene where there's a comedian, for anybody who doesn't know him, Sebastian Maniscalco. It's an Italian-American comedian. He does stand-up comedy, and he's been doing really good stand-up comedy. I actually went to see him live a couple months ago because he was in my city. And he grew up in a very traditional Italian-American family, and, he's successful as a stand-up comedian now. I think he's the 5th highest paid comedian, aside from Jerry Seinfeld or Dave Chappelle. And he, of all people, gets cast in a Scorsese movie, which is the ultimate Italian-American director. And, what's his part, or what's his big entrance into the filmmaking world? It's, De Niro or Russell, Pesci's character, is talking about the guy that's doing things differently in the mafia world. He says, who would be crazy enough, to shoot or assassinate the guy in broad daylight in front of such a crowd? And, he's not even using Italian Americans, and he's not even using his people and all this other stuff. And, that turns out to be Sebastian Maniscalco, who's playing, I think the character's name is Crazy Joe or something like that. That's a mafia character. Or based on someone off of real life. I think there was actually a guy called Crazy Joe, or maybe Crazy something, but I don't remember his name. And that is actually, now that I think of it, brings up a very good scene when it comes to rhythm, and how Scorsese has a sense for visual rhythm and auditory rhythm, but also rhythm of his camera movement in a scene. And again, it's textbook example of this. De Niro's character is told that he needs to kill Crazy Joe, to send a message, because Crazy Joe insults Joe Pesci's character, which Joe Pesci is not happy about. And in the opposite way of how Joe Pesci's character would normally react, say like in the Goodfellas, like, funny how. What's so funny about me, right? Like, he does the opposite, and he stays quiet, and we see the anger brimming inside him, and we know the job that De Niro is going to have to do. So the way that De Niro goes about the sequence of him going about planning for the job is a very rhythmic sequence. He has all the guns on his bed. He's going through the voiceover of which gun is good for what reason and which gun is bad for what reason, and he's process of elimination with the guns, and it's a very musical chairs type of dance as you see the guns visually go from 5 to 2 to 20 to 10 and you see he's eliminating and choosing, because he can only take 2. Again, only Scorsese would portray that in that way, knowing what we know about him astrologically. And when the scene happens, it's super rhythmic. The motion of the movement of the camera, the cuts, the edits, the sequences as a whole, from a wide shot to all the shots that he uses to compose that scene. And it literally pans from the start of the scene to the end, comes back around, and then he's in the car and gone. So buttons it up perfect, and it just goes to show, even at 70 something years old, Scorsese is still giving us his A game.